We will now move on to our final challenge session of the 2021 Summit, Challenge Session 6, the road from COP26 to Rio+30 and COP27, accelerating momentum for a just transition, building back better and multi-level governance and non-state action. Our first panellist this afternoon is Mami Mizutori, Special Representative of the UN Secretary-General, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Unfortunately, Mami cannot be with us today in person or digitally, so we will be joined by a pre-prepared message.
Excellencies, honourable parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, let me start by really apologising for not being present in person for this very important event. I was struck this week by the desperation coming from the small island developing states. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, said 1.5 to stay alive. She warned that 2 degrees would be a death sentence for island states and many coastal communities. We are now very close to that defining marker of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Extreme weather events have doubled in the last 20 years. Last year alone, they displaced a record 30 million people. The Centre Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, adopted by UN member states in 2015, recognizes the systemic nature of disaster risk and the interplay of other risk drivers with climate change, weak governance, under-resourced disaster management agencies, poverty, the mass destruction of protective ecosystems, poor land use, and the threat of epidemics and pandemics. 120 member states have now developed strategies for disaster risk reduction which address climate-related disaster risks, but only 27 of the 46 least developed countries have these strategies. This indicates that they need more support to strengthen their governance and institutions and to build their capacities. Excellencies, the business case for prevention is clear. Every dollar invested in risk prevention can save up to $15 in post-disaster recovery. Parliamentarians have a central role to play. You can work towards passing the needed legislation and translate our international commitments into country-level actions. At the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, we work closely with parliamentarians through our cooperation with the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Together, we focus on how parliamentarians can build a more resilient future for humanity. Working with the IPU, we just published a toolkit for parliamentarians. It highlights 10 actions you can take to influence and implement disaster risk reduction policy adapted to each country's own context. I encourage you to pick up this toolkit, please, and read through the recommendations. Excellencies, COVID-19 pandemic has clearly shown us the systemic nature of risk and that managing systemic risk requires a systems approach. UNDRR advocates for strong and comprehensive risk governance that builds on the interconnected elements of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. At COP26, UNDRR is issuing the following calls to action. 1. Let's raise ambition for reducing and managing climate change risks. A 50-50 share is needed between adaptation and mitigation in the promised but delayed $100 billion for climate-vulnerable developing countries. Let's significantly increase support for averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage. The full spectrum of risk should be addressed, including risks from both extreme and slow onset events triggered by climate change, as well as other natural and man-made hazards. 3. Let's accelerate predictable and risk-informed investment and financing. All climate and development investment and financing should be predictable and risk-informed to better respond to longer-term planning needs. Finally, we urge parliamentarians to ensure that countries take full advantage of opportunities for a green post-COVID-19 recovery. While the pandemic exacerbated existing vulnerabilities and inequalities, It also reaffirmed the importance of an inclusive, equitable, and sustainable development path. With your active leadership, we can build back better for a greener future. I hope to see a strong focus on prevention in the forthcoming Glasgow Accord. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mami. I would now like to introduce Deputy Viviane da Costa Reis, Member of Chamber of Deputies of the Brazilian Parliament. Deputy Reis is currently a federal deputy for Para, a northern Brazilian state that is home to the Amazonia National Park. She is the first LGBT woman and first black woman deputy in Brazil. She is also a physiotherapist, educator, feminist and activist, and affiliated to the Socialism and Freedom Party. I would now like to invite Deputy Reis to speak to the summit.
Contar aqui. Boa tarde a todos, boa tarde a todas.
Good afternoon to you all.
Sou a Vivi Reis, sou deputada federal do PSOL do estado do Pará. Sou uma mulher amazônida que estou hoje atuando como deputada federal do Brasil.
My name is Vivi Reis. I'm a federal deputy from PSOL. I'm an Amazonic woman who is now taking this task to act in the Brazilian Chamber of Deputies.
Agradeço o convite e eu trago aqui, além de um discurso de uma mulher deputada federal, mas também de alguém que vive a realidade da Amazônia e entende a necessidade de que esses espaços de debates internacionais, institucionais, não podem se limitar apenas a esses muros dos diálogos e das negociações.
Besides being a federal deputy, I bring here the reality of those who are affected directly by policies in the Amazon. And we believe that dialogues about climate change cannot be limited within the walls of official conferences.
Entender que nós temos um duro caminho pela frente após a COP26, especialmente para o nosso país, o Brasil, em que vive um momento de, além de crise sanitária, mas também uma crise econômica, social, política e climática.
We have to understand that the road after COP26 is really hard, especially for us in Brazil. We are enduring a social, economic, and environmental deep crisis.
A economia brasileira, hoje, tem priorizado um modelo agroexportador. Um modelo, inclusive, que politicamente tem muita força dentro do parlamento. E que isso muito nos preocupa, pois ele está relacionado diretamente também a questões sociais, da questão da miséria, do desemprego e da fome do povo brasileiro.
Brazil's economy today is focusing on the agribusiness interests of exportation, which leads our country to a deep economic crisis where we find hunger and unemployment.
É entender que esse modo é insustentável, que nós precisamos pensar alternativas que possam, de fato, valorizar o futuro das florestas, dos rios, a necessidade da garantia de alimentos para o povo e a necessidade também da garantia da cultura e da vida de diversos povos indígenas, quilombolas, ribeirinhos e do campo, que hoje são diretamente atacados pela política do governo federal.
This model is a not sustainable model. We need to preserve our forests, our rivers. We need to think about the culture of the peoples that are being directly attacked by Bolsonaro's government, indigenous people, black people, the quilombola communities, the riverside communities.
Eu estou trazendo essa abordagem aqui para destacar o que hoje acontece no país, em que várias pessoas estão passando fome, estão vivendo em miséria, enquanto poderia ter uma prioridade de produção da agricultura familiar, incentivando a plantação e a distribuição dos seus produtos para a mesa de cada um. Mas a política que é priorizada hoje, inclusive com muito respaldo de tentativas de aprovação de projetos de leis por deputados e deputadas, prioriza outros sujeitos. Sujeitos esses que são ruralistas, fazendeiros, grandes produtores, empresários.
I'm bringing these claims here because in our country, people are facing hunger, while we could be avoiding this if we had government-oriented policies towards agricultural, family agricultural production that could be putting food in people's table in a more sustainable way. Unfortunately, the government and also some congressmen and congresswomen are trying to pass bills that only push forward the interests of big landowners, businessmen, agribusiness, and big corporations.
Não é à toa que neste governo houve recorde de desmatamento e de queimadas no Brasil, especialmente no meu estado, e tudo isso vai refletir diretamente no mundo e não só no Brasil. Entender que hoje existem projetos tramitando que atacam diretamente a questão da demarcação de terras indígenas, a legalização do garimpo em terras indígenas e também construção de grandes projetos devido à flexibilização de leis ambientais.
And it comes with no surprise that with all these environmental policies from the federal government, Brazil is facing records of deforestation and wildfires, especially in my state, Pará. There are bills trying to change legislation that would stop indigenous peoples of having their lands established. They are trying to legalize mining in indigenous lands, and they are pushing for this. They are pushing for this big infrastructure projects that are devastating indigenous rights and violating the environment.
Apesar do Brasil possuir 12% da água doce superficial do planeta, mais de 70% desse bem é utilizado para agropecuária. Isso significa que tem relação direta também com a crise hídrica e, consequentemente, também com a crise energética no país.
It is important to highlight that this doesn't only affect Brazil, it affects the entire world. Brazil has 12% of the drinking water in the world and uses 70% of that water for agribusiness production. This is directly related to the water crisis we are living in right now in our country.
Esses são apenas alguns dos exemplos, mas nós poderíamos citar tantos outros. E é entender que a resposta a isso tem que estar associada diretamente com o combate ao atual governo de Jair Bolsonaro. Um governo que, desde o primeiro dia, se mostrou inimigo dos povos indígenas, inimigo de toda a população que defende os territórios e que luta para a permanência da sua cultura, da sua vida e do local como rios e florestas, que são sinônimo de vida para os seus povos.
These are just a few examples. I could give you many more, and they show that fighting for the environment is fighting against the Bolsonaro government. Bolsonaro has declared since his campaign that indigenous peoples, quilombola communities, are their enemies. the rivers, the forests, which are fundamental for the environmental preservation.
E nesse contexto, nós temos que destacar a necessidade de políticas efetivas e não apenas uma política que seja pintada de verde, uma política que vai fazer com que se tenha aparentemente mudanças, mas que na prática não vão refletir diretamente em alternativas que possam garantir o futuro deste planeta.
In this context, we need to push for effective policies. We can no longer accept only greenwashing efforts that don't really change the situation and won't save our planet.
Questionar, inclusive, as saídas com financiamentos que não estejam relacionados diretamente com quem está vivendo essa realidade. Entender que essas negociações também perpassam por buscar alternativas de diálogo que não vá mercantilizar as florestas e os rios.
In this sense, it is important to say to you that international financing should be linked to proper mechanisms that connect that financing to indigenous movements, to the local communities. Qual que foi a última parte que você falou? Desculpa. O último trecho. So, the importance of having this connected to grassroots movements.
E é inconcebível seguir com este governo ecocida, esse governo contra os povos e contra a natureza. Por isso que no Brasil temos mobilizações contínuas nas ruas, nas praças, nos espaços públicos contra o governo de Jair Bolsonaro.
So, to finalize, it's important to fight against this ecocide that is happening in Brazil. This is why people are taking the streets in Brazil, protesting everywhere against this government, against Jair Bolsonaro, and fighting for the environment as well.
Enquanto Bolsonaro estiver no poder, o meio ambiente continua em risco.
While Bolsonaro is in power, the environment is at risk.
Por isso que eu encerro aqui dizendo, seguiremos lutando em defesa do meio ambiente, contra as mudanças climáticas e fora Bolsonaro.
So I conclude saying that we will keep fighting in the defense of the environment, in the defense of the human rights and democracy, and we demand that Bolsonaro is out of power, and we hope that this will happen fora Bolsonaro.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Reis. I would now like to welcome Elizabeth Lee, MLA, Member of the Legislative Assembly and Shadow Minister for Climate Action and Environment, Australian Capital Territory. Elizabeth is the leader of the Canberra Liberals and the Liberal Member for Coorojong in the ACT Legislative Assembly. And prior to entering the Assembly, Elizabeth was a successful lawyer and lecturer at the Australian National University and University of Canberra. I would now like to invite Elizabeth Lee to speak to the summit.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by thanking Globe International for the great honour of coming here to address you today. It has been a long time since we've had the opportunity to fly to the Northern Hemisphere. So 30 hours on a plane travel, but it was worth it. So thank you for having me along. Can I also acknowledge as well my fellow Aussie in the chamber, Senator Dean Smith, who represents Western Australia. So Dean and I are at polar opposite ends of Australia. And if you know how big the country is, you'll know how far away we are. But we were able to get here together. So it's great to have him here. Australia is the world's driest inhabited land and has been identified as one of the developed nations most vulnerable to climate change. We are a country of climatic extremes with temperatures ranging from the high 40s down to below freezing in some of our other regions. Sometimes you can see some of these events in one day as well. Australia experiences almost every climatic condition encountered elsewhere in the world, along with some that are unique to us as well. Heat waves, cold snaps, floods, droughts, wildfires, air pollution. Australia has it all. I come from Canberra, which may come as a surprise to some, but Canberra is actually the capital of Australia. Who knew that? Some people, yeah, okay, some people knew it. Not Sydney, of course, where that's what everyone thinks, that it is Sydney. And Canberra is within the Australian Capital Territory. Geographically very small. We are an island within the state of New South Wales, and our population is 430,000 compared to the 25 million that we have in Australia. So in contrast and comparison to the big cities of Sydney, Melbourne in particular, we are extremely small. As a member of the ACT Legislative Assembly, I'm very proud that we have in the ACT a tripartisan agreement on strong climate action. Canberra is internationally recognised for achieving 100% renewable electricity by 2020 and for our world-leading greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, including 40% reduction of emissions in 2020 and 50% by 2025 and 65 to 70% by 2030. From 1990 levels. We also have an ambitious target, which again was a tripartisan agreement, to reach zero net emissions by 2045. Now, the ACT's climate policies are ambitious. And the reason that we are is because we can. As I mentioned, we are very geographically small. We don't have heavy industry. But we are the home to some of the brightest minds in Australia, if not the world, I'd say. Home, of course, to the Australian National University. In fact, 6 tertiary education organisations within the ACT, and for such a small jurisdiction, that's quite a lot. We know that we have a lot of smarts in our city. And I used my very first budget reply speech as the leader of the Liberal Party earlier this year to say that I really believe that we can be at the forefront of clean energy technology. We know that we've got the community sentiment, the will and the smarts to be able to do it. I won't stand here and tell you that I think it's going to be easy, because it's not. Whilst we have, of course, now achieved 100% renewable electricity, the next phase, beyond COP26, is going to be a challenging road. Transport and gas, which make up about 80% of our emissions, will be a challenge in bringing down. But of course, that doesn't mean that we stop. Consistency and certainty at the federal level, of course, is important, but I have absolutely no doubts that states and territories, and even down to the individual cities within countries, play a massive role when it comes to cutting carbon. Of course, it's important for us to think global, which is why we're here today, but to act local and understand that every step makes a difference. In fact, just before I was coming here, I was asked on local radio, hey, you're the opposition leader of a territory government, what are you going to be able to do? And our emissions are 0.2% of Australia's emissions. But if every single one of us thought like that, we wouldn't get very far. So every step makes a difference, no matter how small. Housing, transport, heating, lighting, urban planning, infrastructure development, these are some of the key leverage points for reduced greenhouse gas emissions in urban areas, and of course they come under the responsibility of our subnational governments. Local governments have always played a role in the international climate regime, and we see fairly ambitious targets all across Australia at the state and territory levels, with those governments also taking climate action very seriously. And as a subnational legislator, I'm in a very unique position to contribute to boosting cooperative climate action by governments at all levels, working with industry, business and other organisations as well. There's no doubt that I think Australia backs technology. There is no doubt about that. And we've heard already earlier today talking about the importance of science, of course, when we're talking about climate action. And that's why I back Canberra, my hometown, because, as I said, we are the home, the knowledge capital, and the home to some of the greatest minds in the country. In the economic fallout resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a growing global debate and concern about whether we can afford to build back better without investing in sustainable solutions to the global biodiversity and climate change challenges. And I think the following steps are necessary. The first is to, of course, review the current state of the COVID-19 pandemic. There is no doubt that we're all learning to live in the new COVID normal. The second is to assess the impact on developing countries that are exposed to inequalities, vulnerabilities and financial stresses. The third is to frame an approach to build back better. Structures, systems, processes and a new way of thinking. And we heard a session earlier today, just before lunch, about the role that law and the courts have in this regard too. The fourth is transition. Let's focus on policy commitments, low carbon resilience, decarbonisation, economic and social and environmental well-being. And the fifth is about sustainability. Let's support each other, support countries to maintain the changes over the long term, because frankly, we can't afford not to. I believe that everyone wants action on climate change, and certainly in my home city, it is always a top 5 issue when it comes to what people want from their political leaders. But nobody wants their electricity bills to go up, their lights to go out, or for their jobs to be at risk. Technology may have the answers to a decarbonised economy, particularly over time, and to achieve it in a way that does not deny our citizens, especially in developing economies, their livelihoods or the opportunity for a better quality of life. But it does require leadership and political will, and this is a responsibility on all of us. We, as legislators, are in an enormously privileged position to be the voice for our community, and we all have a duty to leave our planet better and greener for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. I would now like to welcome our final panellist this afternoon, Tunç Soyer, Mayor of Izmir, Turkey and Climate Action Co-Chair for ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability, a global network of more than 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development. Tunç was elected Mayor of Izmir Metropolitan Municipality in local elections in March 2019. Prior to this, he was Mayor of Seferihisar, where he implemented the international local-scale slow city development model and then later introduced it to the 7 geographical areas of Turkey and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. I would like to invite Tunç Soyer to speak to the summit.
Thank you so much. I am honored to participate in this meeting. Democracy maybe is the best and the most important innovation of humankind. It was introduced to history in the Asian region. Democracy stands for a set of values based on the rule of law and fundamental human rights. However, the world has come to a different point. Today, democracy's view of life has to change and gain a new perspective. This change is only possible by developing a new horizon for democracy, which includes nature. Humanity shall not act as a power that has superiority over other species. It has no right to dominate the ecosystem. Humans only coexist with all living species in nature. For this, to rethink the fundamentals of human rights, together with the rights of the nature, the rights of trees, lakes, plains, forests, rivers. They collectively generate our common right to live. In fact, the essence of nature rights is already in the spirit of democracy. But now we need to say louder. Human rights alone are not enough. The fight against the climate crisis is not an issue that can be handled with populism. We have to describe the rights of nature in a way that it embraces all struggles for rights, including the climate crisis. Dear legislators, I see culture as a mortar that binds the building together, or the drops of water that connect the roots and branches of a tree. Whatever we do in our lives, be it science, arts, sports, or politics, it doesn't matter. Culture is present in all of them. Culture is the mortar that holds it all together, the sap of life. If it oozes away even a little bit, the harmony of life distorts. Life ceases to be a whole. It disintegrates into its individual parts. Obviously, we cannot build a sustainable future for our planet without developing a culture in harmony with nature. Therefore, like everything else, the fight against the climate crisis needs a cultural foundation, a circular culture. In this respect, the Izmir Declaration, the main output of UCLG Culture Summit, is a milestone explaining circular culture as a powerful paradigm that can shape the future of humanity. Circular culture rises on 4 pillars: harmony without nature, harmony with the past, harmony with each other, and not last but least, harmony with change. Humanity, the inventor of art, philosophy, economy, inspired by the universe, and came to a moment when it broke all ties with nature. By doing so, we failed to develop cultural principles that embrace nature as a whole. From here, the climate crisis was born. On our planet, a species becomes extinct almost every 10 minutes. For this reason, one pillar of circular culture is based on harmony with our nature. There is no science without culture. If so, it creates an atomic bomb, a thermal power plant. There is no economy without culture. If so, there is hunger, there is inequality, there is the climate crisis. There is no politics without culture. If so, there are wars, there is destruction. There is no urbanism without culture. If so, there are floods, disasters. I hope that COP26 will produce decisions that will cover the concept of circular culture and its principles, which is much needed in the fight against the climate crisis. Dear legislators, humanity is at an important crossroads. Let's be realistic about where we are 75 years after the birth of the United Nations, 50 years after the Stockholm Environment and Vancouver Habitat, 30 years after the Earth Summit, and even 5 years after the Paris Agreement. Our solutions were incremental, while challenges escalated exponentially. And the past 2 years of COVID-19 pandemic reminded us at least one clear stark. The power and potential of urban world of 21st century can help our nations to tackle global challenges if they embrace multi-level cooperation. Indeed, 5 years ago, the Paris Agreement opened a new era in global climate action by recognizing the importance of engagement of all levels of government. Here in Glasgow, it is now time to turn this into practice. Since 2015, only around 80 of roughly 200 nations have increased their national climate ambitions. United States and Rwanda, Japan and Dominican Republic are some of these, and they all have one thing in common. Their national climate ambitions were increased because they worked closely with their local governments. It is now clear more than ever, in our urban world of 21st century, multi-level collaboration underpinned by a circular culture is one of the few, if not the only, inspiration of hope to respond to the age of climate emergency. In this second phase of the Paris Agreement, the nations of the world must embrace multi-level collaboration as the new normal. And Glasgow, the birthplace of industrial revolution, must be recognized as the place where a new generation of transformative climate action has started. Here in Glasgow, the first days of COP26, for the first time, coincide with the 31st October, the World Cities Day, opening not just a 12 days conference, but a new era of time for multi-level action. That is why ICLEI and the Scottish Government have convened the Multi-Level Action Pavilion at the heart of COP26 Blue Zone as the home for cities, towns and regions in the UNFCCC negotiations. The next phase of multi-level collaboration must bridge nationally determined contributions with local and regional climate strategies. Moreover, more resources have to be mobilized for municipalities that have declared climate emergency and committed to ambitious climate action through Reis to Zero and Reis to Resilient initiatives of the UNFCCC. This era of multi-level action can only be durable if it is fully embraced and developed with the lawmakers and other members of legislative bodies at the local, subnational and national level. Such collaborative efforts between legislative and executive bodies can ensure that these transformative visions can be sustained through long-term political consensus. Thus is why, in its capacity as the focal point of local government and municipal authorities constituency to the UNFCCC since 1995, ICLEI warmly welcomes and supports the new initiatives of the Globe International. I'm confident that the collaboration between ICLEI and the Globe International on multi-level climate action can introduce a huge momentum for ambitious action at all levels in the second phase of the Paris Agreement. As humanity searches for life's new sentences in Glasgow, I would like to ask, will we listen to the voice of our conscience? Or will we be overwhelmed by the insatiable ambition of a small group of individuals? Here in Glasgow, we will hear the answer. Meanwhile, I seem to hear the answers of thousands of people raising the voice of their conscience indoors and outdoors, in meeting rooms and squares. I know that the same voice is shouted by billions of people in cities and in the furthest reaches of the planet, and by the magnificent biodiversity in forests, rivers, mountains, and seas. I see that young people want to hear from us the words of our conscience, not our ambitions. I would like to thank Globe International wholeheartedly for inviting me to participate in this important meeting. I clearly know that all of us here are ready to express the words of our conscience towards multi-level collaboration to make our world a much better planet to live. I greet you all with affection and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Soyer. Thank you. Thank you. It is now time to put some of your questions to the panel. If you wish to ask a question, please do raise a hand. Please, go ahead.
That's actually not really a question. It was more of firstly a gratitude. I think that was the most incredible speech, and I think that I'm not a parliamentarian. I'm in this amazing building for parliamentarians, and I think parliamentarians can perhaps get bogged down with all the things that happen on an everyday level. The committees, the reams of things to read through, all the endless paragraphs of details and everything. And I think that what that amazing gentleman just did was just bring the big picture back in a really beautiful way. And my question is, can we have a conversation at another point, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you'd like to respond to that very positive contribution. I feel that you should, Tunç. Please, would you like to respond?
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can have a conversation. You can carry it on here if you'd like. We'd all enjoy that. Do we have any other questions or contributions? Yes, Fiona Hislop, MSP, Scottish Parliament.
Thank you very much. I think that last session has made it real in lots of ways, and we know that global leaders can talk in big figures, and we're talking about trillions and billions for mitigation adaptation. We know that national parliaments can set targets and can have legislation, but it's the impact on people and the stories of people that will mobilise and have that political impact. And do you think collectively, perhaps in the desire for action, in the desire for targets and in the desire for law, we kind of have lost the spirit of humanity that brings us together, and perhaps a more philosophical and cultural approach, telling the stories that connect us, telling the stories of our nature and our peoples, perhaps might be a bit of the fire, and maybe that's the wrong analogy to use in this context, but a bit of the engine to make sure that we can really get momentum, because momentum is what we need. But if we ignore the philosophical, if we ignore the cultural, and we ignore the heritage, we're missing what makes us human in the first place.
Thank you, Fiona. I will put that to Tunç, and then to Elizabeth, and then to Deputy Reis. Please go ahead.
I just want to thank you for your contribution. I just want to say that we have to underline the similarities between us, not the differences, because we know very well that there are more common things and similarities between us than the differences. And it is now time to underline those common benefits, those similarities, because we are all affected. So we have to keep our hope first and increase the solidarity between us. Not only the governments, not only the municipalities, but people to people. We have to increase our solidarity, and we have to increase our hope for the future and find new ways to come together. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Elizabeth.
Thank you for your contribution. I think that it was really important to put it in context, and obviously following on from the Mayor's speech as well, and also Jojo, isn't it? I think, was it? No. Yes. Yeah. It's funny because when I first got into politics, one of the critical pieces of advice that actually came from my father was about how you should always look, hear, feel, and then speak, because as a leader now, whatever you say does matter. And I think it's important because it really hones in on that human element. And there's also the first woman parliamentarian in Australia who spoke in her inaugural speech about whatever decision she makes, whatever laws she passes, it's got to actually strike a heart somewhere. And that's really goes to the heart of, I think, what you're trying to say, and I think that it is really important that as parliamentarians, as Jojo pointed out, we get bogged down in a lot of the process, daily grind stuff, but let's not forget the purpose of why we're there and who we are there to serve.
Thank you. Deputy Reis.
Eu acredito que na política é necessário, sim, a filosofia, é necessário, inclusive, a poesia, é necessária a arte, é necessária a cultura, mas o afeto, mas também não se faz política sem muita firmeza, sem muita convicção. Então, é fundamental que possamos construir essa política também, conectando de um modo internacional. Acredito que a política tem que ser internacionalista, mas tem que ser dentro dessa diversidade. E é dentro dessa diversidade que a gente vai pensar o futuro do nosso mundo, né? Que é só um. E ele tem que traduzir aqui.
I agree, and I believe that politics should have philosophy, and should have culture, should have poetry, should have affection. It also should have strong positions, and with that we can connect between our differences as well as internationally. We should always be connecting. In this way, we can advance on our political struggles.
Thank you. Do we have any further... Oh, would you like to carry on? No? No. Do we have any further questions? Parliament of Malta?
I'd like to continue on the same note. I think we went on a different level now, haven't we, in this discussion? In the previous sessions, the minutes somebody, yourself, Madam Chair, told us if we have any questions, hands would just fly up. And all of a sudden, this panel just shot us back down and reality has hit us. And it is because I think there's the human side here and there's this storytelling which was referred to earlier. I'm here because the shadow speaker for climate change in Malta is actually a man, and because there was obviously an important rule set here where the representatives had to be 50-50. So I ended up here, and I really do not regret it one little tiny bit. But it also tells me how much more sensitive we have to be from a gender perspective, because with all due respect, this is where I think, as our friend from Canberra just told us, this is where we have to touch people's hearts. And if we don't, we can talk about numbers and percentages, and it really throws me in a completely different direction. But I think this is where we need to go. People need to know that we're not talking about just numbers. We're talking about lives. And this is what really makes a difference. And I think I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I will ask our panellists to respond to the comments you've just made. Can I put it first to Elizabeth and then to Deputy Reis and then to Tunç? Thank you.
Thank you for that contribution. I think you're right. It is important, and the fact that you're able to actually recognise the difference in the mood in the room, I think, really did say it all as well. And you know, it is important, and we get a lot of political pressure, I think, to set targets and do this and do that, and that is important. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that that's not important, but at the same time, whatever decision we make at the political level as very, very privileged elected members has to always remember the purpose in which it's made. And that's certainly, I think, something that can get a bit lost. So the fact that we're being reminded of this today, I think, is a really, really good thing. So thank you for that.
Deputy Reis.
Agora eu vou falar devagar. Inclusive, temos debatido sobre um conceito de racismo ambiental, né? Entender que a questão ambiental está relacionada diretamente com o questionamento de quais sujeitos estão hoje mais atingidos pelas mudanças climáticas. Esse é um elemento importante, que nós não podemos esquecer quando se debate sobre a questão climática. Então, de fato, não são apenas números, são pessoas dentro de marcadores sociais, econômicos, de gênero, de raça, de classe.
It is true. It's not only about numbers. This is why in Brazil we've been talking so much about the concept of environmental racism. The people being affected directly by the consequences of climate change, they have names, their gender, race. So it's true. We need to go beyond numbers and talk about the reality of the people.
E entender que a nossa luta ambiental e contra as mudanças climáticas, ela tem que estar relacionada diretamente com esses marcadores sociais. Inclusive, hoje, quem são as protagonistas da defesa dos territórios na Amazônia são mulheres. São mulheres indígenas, são mulheres quilombolas, são mulheres ribeirinhas.
And it is important to consider those differentiation marks. And it's important to highlight that today, those leading the struggle for the environment in Brazil are the women, especially the indigenous women.
E por isso que a gente tem que seguir defendendo a necessidade de uma política que seja pela garantia de equidade de gênero, de raça, e que também fale sobre a importância das pessoas dos diversos territórios poderem estar falando nesses espaços, como eu, que sou do Pará, da Amazônia, estou aqui hoje.
This is why this is so important that we have gender balanced events and race balanced events, and that the people that are suffering directly the consequences of climate change can be speaking at events like this, such as myself. I come from Pará, I come from the Amazon, and I'm here talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now, Tunç.
Again, I would like to emphasize about this circular culture, because climate crisis is such a big crisis which everybody has to fight at this and take part in this fight. And culture might be the most important instrument, a kind of leverage for this fight. And this circular culture, as I mentioned, raised on 4 pillars: harmony with nature, harmony with each other, harmony with the past, and harmony with the change itself. Change is inevitable, so we have to take the inspiration from the nature and the creativity of the youth in this fight. Thank you again.
Thank you. I think we will move on now to the, I see a hand up there, Sarah Boyack, MSP.
I'll keep it very short, Presiding Officer. That's what we normally have to do in here. Thanks for taking me. Can I just say, I just think this has been an absolutely inspiring session, but it comes off the back of a fantastic event. And at the networking, there's a few of us who've been thinking about how do we all follow on from this, whether it's in our own parliaments, building the multi-level links that you've talked about this afternoon, building into culture. And and it might be the last speeches will sum up for this, but how do we, as the people here today, actually make the difference, whatever is the deal at COP and whatever committee you're on? How do we build the support in each of our parliaments to actually make sure that this fantastic event is not just inspirational to us, but actually becomes a game changer for those of us involved in different networks like the CPA Climate Subgroup, the Globe Parliamentarians, all the people here? What networks can we activate afterwards in our own parties as well to actually bring the change that I think this last session has made us feel really passionate about? Thanks, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very important question, and I will ask Juan Carlos Villalonga to address that as he sums up. So before we close the COP26 Globe Legislator Summit, I would like to invite Juan Carlos, President of Globe International, to say a few words.
En español, así que los auriculares. Estamos terminando, Presidenta. Cerrando las jornadas. Bueno, es bueno el clima que se generó y es bueno terminar con este nivel de inspiración. Yo voy a hacer algún punteo, algunas notas que fui tomando de lo mucho que se dijo. Por supuesto, no pienso hacer un resumen ni un sumario, ni mucho menos. Algunos puntos que yo destaco es que me parece que para la agenda que estuvimos tratando y el desafío que tenemos por delante, una palabra que apareció creo que en la primera intervención del representante de Maldivas, que fue la calidad democrática, y esto sobrevoló en varias intervenciones, incluso de una manera contundente con la intervención de Afganistán. Creo que también el caso de Brasil, la calidad democrática también lo mencionó el representante de ICLEI, porque necesitamos en este proceso de la sostenibilidad en general, necesita toda la creatividad de la sociedad, toda la diversidad de la sociedad. Entonces necesitamos una buena calidad democrática y creo que eso fue algo que sobrevoló, me parece destacable. Por otro lado, obviamente que se reiteró muchas veces el rol de control de calidad, de seguimiento, de monitoreo por parte de los parlamentos. Básicamente se mencionó el caso de las NDC, los compromisos. Yo les recuerdo además que nuestros países, por lo menos los países en desarrollo, yo creo que los desarrollados tienen más compromisos todavía. Nuestros países entregan cada 2 años un informe a la Convención de Clima. Y allí no solo está el tema de los compromisos, está el inventario, está el programa de adaptación y está la política institucional, es decir, el arreglo institucional con el cual nuestros gobiernos enfrentan la acción climática. Creo que todo eso tiene que ser monitoreado y seguido por los parlamentos, por los legisladores, porque si no es un documento que se entrega y queda depositado en la Convención. Y allí es un documento de total carácter político. Y ahí está el tema mitigación, adaptación, riesgos de desastres. Ese es el segundo punto. El tercero, y está vinculado con el primero, que es la interacción creativa con la sociedad. Esto lo noté que lo dijo Dean Lockhart. ¿Y qué es esto de cómo alentamos que la sociedad interactúe con nosotros? No solo a través de las organizaciones especializadas o las que típicamente hacen cabildeo, sino con la sociedad en su sentido más amplio, para escuchar aquello que nos puede sorprender, aquello que puede ser la voz del sentido común que a veces no nos llega ni por la ONG especializada ni por el lobby corporativo que tanto se habló. Después también en la intervención específica sobre biodiversidad, creo que el reclamo del pedido de acción, que a pesar de que las últimas noticias dicen que las promesas que han hecho los países en estos últimos días mejoran la ambición, incluso que la brecha se ha reducido a la mitad en esta semana con respecto a la trayectoria de 1.5 grados, pero eso no es suficiente, no es suficiente. La biodiversidad no lo tolera y muchos de los colegas que estuvieron aquí de países absolutamente vulnerables no nos perdonaría si no continuamos el esfuerzo para el 1,5. Así que, bueno, la permanente, el compromiso de Globe para continuar trabajando en ese sentido. Después me sorprendió y gratamente la participación, el panel donde estuvo el juez Benjamin y tuvimos allí una... Interesante porque el vínculo entre los legisladores y la justicia no siempre ocurre de manera fluida. Y es cierto que esa mirada de los jueces y del control de calidad es muy, muy importante. A veces se exacerba la independencia de los poderes, pero no en el sentido de tener una un vínculo creativo, un vínculo de cooperación en serio. Creo que allí tenemos mucho para trabajar y GLOB tiene que fortalecer esta línea de acción. Sobre ese panel quiero decir algo, porque por ahí se habló del lobby de las corporaciones petroleras y de cómo frenamos la infraestructura que se nos vuelve en contra a los objetivos de reducción. La verdad, nosotros somos políticos, pertenecemos a partidos políticos y cada uno de esos proyectos, infraestructuras, nuevos pozos petroleros fueron licitados, tuvieron un permiso. Así que tenemos mucho para trabajar y allí, digamos, no podemos señalar el problema como si fuésemos una ONG. Y lo digo yo que fui por muchos años una ONG. Creo que tenemos que ser muy autocríticos. No quiero abrir una polémica, ni mucho menos, pero es algo en donde tenemos que ser muy reflexivos. Por otro, bueno, finalmente ya en términos de GLOB, creo que se ha producido esta novedad para nosotros y todo un reconocimiento para que GLOB sea focal point en el grupo parlamentario dentro de la Convención y con el apoyo de, quiero mencionarlos, la Asociación Parlamentaria del Commonwealth, Parlaméricas, la Fundación para la Democracia de Westminster, el Climate Parliament, ICLEI, que nos acompaña, y con todos ellos vamos a seguir trabajando no solo en la agenda climática, como decía, en la agenda de la biodiversidad. Creo que después del 2015, después de ese gran año en las negociaciones internacionales, se hablaba de la agenda de convergencia, París, los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y el marco de Sendai, de gestión de riesgos de desastres. Bueno, terminamos. Creo que, por otro lado, también apareció la apuesta muy grande que siempre ha hecho GLOB a la agenda de género, a que los parlamentos tengamos una buena representación de equidad y de paridad de género. Y me consta el esfuerzo que hemos hecho para que eso se vea reflejado en este seminario. Por último, bueno, gracias no solo a las autoridades, sino a todo el staff del Parlamento que nos han atendido maravillosamente bien en este lugar hermoso. Así que, y por supuesto especialmente a Alison, la presidenta del Parlamento, que nos ha hospedado maravillosamente bien. Así que muchas gracias y bueno, terminamos. Y un aplauso para todos.
Thank you very much indeed, Juan Carlos. Your thanks are gratefully appreciated. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and panellists and, of course, all the delegates who have attended the summit over the last 2 days. It's been a great honour to be able to chair the summit here at the Scottish Parliament. I certainly won't forget it, and I feel sure from my many conversations over the weekend with delegates from across the world that is true for all who have been with us this weekend. And I know that links have been built here that will be built upon. And I know too that you'll return to your respective parliaments even more ready to take on the challenges that face us, empowered and inspired by the expert and passionate speakers we have heard from this weekend from across the globe. Now, we finished the summit today with another song, Worth It, a preview from the new pop musical This Is a Love Story, which is being performed and live streamed from the Dundee Rep at 7:30 p.m. this evening. This song will be performed by Kibong Tanji, and the musical explores the 200,000-year love story between Earth and humanity. I hope you've enjoyed the summit as much as I have, and I leave you with this fresh and thought-provoking look at our relationship with planet Earth, and I wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you.
Life was kinda boring when you came along. Like a million millennia, the same old song. You came out of nowhere, saw a brand new sight to me. You seized the opportunity and put the lights on me. Well, now you're moving into my place, we're becoming official. Got a lot of jealous friends who tell me it's artificial, but they never had a lover that could totally transform the way you're cooking up a storm as your plans form. Although the more I think about it, and please believe it's real love and I would never doubt it. I know it's probably nothing, I know you're simply the best. There's just a couple little things I need to get off my chest. Like, even when I know you care. No, you care. No, you care. Put your stuff down everywhere. Everywhere, everywhere. And you move on, never clean up. Maybe I'm not your cleaner, but it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it. It's worth it. Happy that you're here to stay. Here to stay, here to stay. But why you smoking every day? Every day, every day. You're announcing it's your new thing, and I'm not sure what you're doing, but it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it. But while we're at it, baby, there's one more thing. So ambitious and I love to see you soaring. I'll be there to support you like we always agreed, but it kind of feels like you're taking more than you need. Well, you started from the bottom, now your goal's bigger, but my friends have started calling you a cold digger, and I know you only do it cause you're insecure. I just need you to remind me what you're in this for. Oh, heaven knows that I'm not perfect. I know sometimes I hurt you when you really don't deserve it. See, I got problems too, just like you below the surface, but you and me, yeah, we can make this work. We make it worth it, it's worth it. Even when I'm blowing up, blowing up, blowing up, got all these problems showing up, showing up, showing up, and I tear down what you planted, and you take all this for granted, but it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it. But leaving footprints in my house, in my house, in my house. Just what the hell is that about? I know deep down you're good-hearted, and it's not like how we started, but it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it, it's worth it. It's worth it, it's worth it. It's worth it, it's worth it. If you wanna play with my love, then you're not respecting my love. I need you to deal with how I feel, cause push is coming to shove. If I tell you it's a problem, best believe that it's a problem. See, you're going on without knowing, honestly, it's kinda troubling. Sure, it's just a little concern, plus another little concern, but they're adding up and I'm mad enough, and I think it's time that you learn. Keep on driving your Ferraris, keep on drinking your Bacardis. Oh, you're loving them, but just you remember who's paying for your parties. My love worth the mine, my life worth the mine, my body worth the mine, my time worth the mine, my heart worth the mine, my shine worth the mine. If you wanna play with my love, you're gonna see just what I'm made of. My love worth the mine, my life worth the mine, my body worth the mine, my time worth the mine, my heart worth the mine, my shine worth